Hello and welcome to the third part of the IELTS Part 3. Today, in this section, I'm going to talk about the third part. I covered the first and the second part. And we said in the first part, it's going to be something that is much more personal, like you might talk about your friend, where you live, your favorite hobby, etc. Okay, so it's going to be section one. It's just like a drinking coffee, let's say, with somebody and talking about some personal issues. When we move to section two, it's getting much more difficult. You have 1 minute to think about some questions, and then you need to speak to 2 minutes continuously without any interruption in a presentation form, and we call it mini presentation. Now, section 3 is going to be an interview. That is, we don't have we do have some questions that you're going to be asked that is related to part 2, and it's also related to part 1, and we're going to see this more in details. At the same time, it's going to be a general topic rather than personal. So I mean by general topic, if in part 1 I ask you about your favorite, for example, subject, and in task 2 or in part 2 I ask you about your favorite teacher, in part 3 is going to be a question like, how do you think teachers could be better in the future? How can we improve teaching, for example? How do you think education is different from the past? How do you think the education is now different from the past? So in this section, you're going to discuss a general topic in which you have to give an opinion, compare, contrast, analyze, etc. Let's move on and see some of the details. Now, general details. So the time, first of all, is going to be from 3 to 4 minutes. The whole exam is going to be up to 15 minutes. So the parts of the questions, all kinds of the questions, you're going to predict, you're going to analyze, compare, give opinion, and mostly you're going to look for the future. Example, what type of sport is going to be played in the future? Do you think it's the same football? Basketball? Do you think there are going to be new kind of sports, etc.? The theme is related to part 2. For example, in part 2 you might speak about your favorite teacher, and in part 3 you're going to speak about education. Of course, it's related. Part 1, 2, and 3, all of them together are related to each other. If in the first part you speak about your favorite subject, then in part 2 you might talk about your favorite teacher or your school life, and then or university life, and then in the section 3 you're going to talk about education. Could be about how to improve the education. You compare the education from the the past and the present. You could talk about how we could improve the education to have better, for example, students, etc. Things like that. So they are related to each other. Some other general details. We have more examples here. The examples could be about technology, education, but technology, we're not going to ask you what's your favorite device or what kind of device do you use to, for example, learn. No, it's going to be something general. Do you think now people in your country use technology more than in the past? Something like this. What are the advantages and disadvantages could be of technology? But we're not going to ask you something personal. Education, environment, TV, TV influence, sorry, leisure activities, shopping, sport, transportation, all these kinds of topics could be covered. So you have to speak in general. Again, I have to make sure or remind you that the topic is not impossible to talk about. You can give your opinion. For example, how our education priorities are different from those in the past. So, I think how our education priorities now are different from those in the past. It's just, I missed the word now. So, again, you need to talk about, for example, education priorities. You might say, teacher, I don't know the education priorities. I'm not working in the Ministry of Education. Well, even if you don't know, but the question is, can't you make it up? Suppose that, you can immediately suppose that the priority of education is like in the past is that they need the students to memorize and get as much as possible high marks. Now the education, for example, is focusing on analyzing and critical thinking and things like that. So you can talk about, for example, coronavirus. In the past, for example, they would talk, for example, before coronavirus, education was in the class. Now, after coronavirus, people started using online, and we might have a dramatic change in the future, and we might not go back to the classroom even if the coronavirus finishes. So you can predict the future. Okay, don't worry. Even if we don't go back to the schools, or we don't, if your opinion is not really, you know, if I don't like your opinion, but if it's your opinion, it's okay. You're going to get marks for that. Your opinion is not going to, sorry, your opinion is not going to be judged. So if you say, for example, we're not going to go back to classes because we're all using online, I might have different opinion, but this is not going to affect your mark at all. So now let's move to the things that you should do. So there are going to be something similar to part one and part two, but we have some more details to add. Number one, listen for keywords of the question, because usually the question is going to be long. The question is going to be whether it's, for example, you hear the word education, you hear the word school. This will help you to predict what the question is going to be about. And this is going to help you to understand the question more. Okay, so generally what the topic is about, and you can predict, of course, the topic starting from part one and two, actually. Okay, so this is number one, try to listen to the keywords of the question. Ask to repeat and a clarification of a word. Ask to repeat, ask to repeat the question. Ask the examiner to repeat the question. If you don't understand, don't feel shy. Ask for a clarification of a word if you don't understand, because you might not understand a word here in this section. Give details, examples, and reasons. Just like the previous example. If you're talking about, I think that education in the future is going to be better for three main reasons. Number one, number two, and then number three. Okay? So give reasons. Give examples. Remember, try to think of examples, how the education was and how the education is going to be, and say which one is better. Okay? Think of some examples. So give details, give examples, and give reasons. Think about these things. And remember, you're going to compare. Either you're going to compare, analyze, and things like that. Stick to the topic. Don't go off topic, of course. This is the general advice for all parts. Build vocabulary beforehand. I talked about this in part two, in part one, and I'm confirming this again in part three. Relate questions to your own life. Okay? Talk about your experience. You might say, but teacher, here we're talking about general topic. How can we relate this to our experience? It's by giving examples. If we're talking about education, is it, for example, do you think the education is going to be better in the future? You can say yes for one or two reasons. And while you're giving reason, you can give examples of your own real life. Okay? Because you need to support your ideas. Divide your answer. There are three ways. It's very recommended to organize and to help you brainstorming. So, for example, again, the same example. Do you think the education in the future will be better? Yes, I think it's going to be improved for three or four or two reasons, for one main reason, and then you can go on discussing these reasons. Okay? Try to learn expressions of opinion and comparison, etc. So, for example, if you need to compare, do you know how to compare between the present and the past? Do you know the structure? Do you know how to say I think in many ways? Okay, can you say it? Or you always keep saying I think, I think, I think, I think, I think, the most common one? Okay, so try to learn or expand your expressions. Don't memorize your answer. Don't you worry if you make mistakes. The more you worry, because the less fluency you'll have, and you're not going to do really good. Don't use too many. Don't use it too many times. Because this is going to show you that you're not fluent. Don't use I think too much, because this is we're asking here about your opinion. So some students might keep saying I think, I think, I think, I think, I think. So try not to use I think too many times. Say I don't know. Don't say I don't know. Again, as I told you, this is something not impossible. Okay, you can do it. Just try to do your best. Try to think of reasons, try to think of examples from your life, and I think you will be able to do it. For more examples, if you just feel that you're not good enough, you can just ask your teacher, or again, use my favorite friend, Google. Just write IELTS Part 3 topics, and then press enter, and you'll have thousands maybe of websites. You can just go read the questions and check. But again, the main idea of this part is going to be interview. The interviewer or the examiner is going to ask you questions. The questions are going to be general, covering the society, the country, the education. It's not going to be personal. Okay. Section 1, just to sum up now all the parts. So part 1 is going to be much more personal, as if you're drinking coffee or tea with your friend and asking you about your personal life. Section 2 is we're going to give you the, kind of the mic to speak for 2 minutes continuously. By this section, we're going to be able to see your fluency. So we give you 1 or 2 minutes to think about whatever you want to talk about, brainstorm your ideas, put down all the ideas you want to talk about, and then start speaking. Show me your fluency. We understand that in your speaking, that sometimes you need to think about an idea, you need time. So just like I'm speaking naturally, so sometimes you need time to think about an idea, so you need to kind of now, just like what I'm doing, you might say, so that's why we give you at the beginning of the section or part 2, we give you 2 minutes to think about the ideas. Take your time. These 2 minutes, think about the ideas, write the main words, and then start speaking. So the aim is to measure your fluency in section 2. And then in section 3, or in part 3 of this, is going to be a continuous of part 2, is going to be a topic that is related to part 2. And we're going to ask you much more general questions related to your country or maybe society. Not necessarily, it could be about just like the examples of giving, but mainly it's not going to be personal. But still, you can give your reasons and you give an examples from your personal life. Okay, but we're not going to talk about your life again. Okay, that's all for part 3. Thank you and bye.